It had been raining for 3 days straight in the small English town of Bath, the kind of rain that seeps into the bones and makes even the heart feel heavy. Daniel Harris sat alone on the wooden pew at St. Michael's Church, his hands folded but not in prayer. He didn't know how to pray anymore. Once his faith had been strong enough to light up the darkest rooms, but now he couldn't even find the switch. His wife, Claire, had been gone for 6 months. Cancer had taken her in silence, the same way she had always lived, quietly, gracefully, without complaint. He had begged God for a miracle every night until her last breath, but heaven never answered. Or maybe it did, and he just couldn't hear it through the noise of his grief. The church was empty, except for the faint crackle of candles near the altar and the echo of distant thunder rolling over the hills. The air smelled faintly of rain, wax, and forgotten prayers. Daniel stared at the cross at the front, the wooden figure of Christ hanging in still agony, and whispered, "You saw her tears, didn't you? You saw mine, too. So why didn't you do anything?" His voice broke at the last word, swallowed by the vast silence of the sanctuary. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and pressed his palms into his eyes, as if he could squeeze the pain out through his skin. "If you're there," he muttered, "show me something, anything." But nothing came, no light, no voice, not even the comfort of a passing breeze. Only silence, so thick it felt holy. He almost laughed at himself. He had once been a man who led others in prayer, a Sunday teacher, a believer. Now he was just a hollow version of who he used to be, a man sitting in an empty church, asking questions he already knew might never be answered. He looked up again, his eyes catching the flicker of candlelight reflecting off the gold edge of the altar Bible. The words carved on the wall above it read, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Daniel shook his head and whispered, "I don't feel blessed, and I sure as hell don't feel comforted." The clock in the bell tower struck 9. The sound was deep, echoing, and final. Daniel stood up slowly, ready to leave, but as he turned, the sound of something, soft and distant, made him pause. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the creak of old wood. It was music. Faint, almost imperceptible, like a hymn being sung somewhere far away. He turned back toward the altar, eyes narrowing. The church was dim, lit only by the candles he had lit earlier, yet something about the space felt different now. The shadows seemed to move, not menacingly, but gently, like the shifting of curtains stirred by an invisible wind. The music grew clearer. He recognized the tune. It was "Abide with Me," the same hymn they had played at Claire's funeral. His chest tightened. "No," he whispered, "I'm imagining this." But the melody didn't fade. It grew louder, warmer, surrounding him like water rising in a pool. The candle flames flickered, bending toward the cross as though drawn to it. And then, through the music, came a whisper, soft, steady, unmistakable. "I saw her tears." Daniel froze. The sound wasn't from behind him or above him. It was inside him. His pulse quickened. He looked around, his rational mind trying to anchor itself to something logical, but there was no one there. The voice came again, this time clearer. "I saw yours." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Who's there?" he demanded, though the words barely left his lips. The church seemed to breathe around him. The air thickened with light. Not bright, not blinding, but warm, golden, like sunlight filtered through honey. For a moment he could see particles floating in it, slow and suspended, as though time itself had paused. He felt a sudden peace he couldn't explain, and then, just as suddenly, an overwhelming flood of memory. Every tear, every prayer, every night spent by Claire's bedside whispering for mercy that never came. The voice continued, not loud, but full of presence. "You thought I was silent, but I was holding her hand when you couldn't." Daniel staggered back, tears welling instantly. "No," he said under his breath, "this isn't real. I'm dreaming." The light pulsed softly, as if it were breathing with him. "You asked for healing,
And I gave her peace. You asked for strength, and I carried you through the nights you thought you'd break." Daniel fell to his knees, his tears falling freely now, his sobs echoing softly in the vast space. "Why me?" he whispered. "Why are you talking to me now when it's too late?" The answer came, not in words this time, but in a feeling, warmth spreading through his chest, the same way Claire's laughter used to fill a room. "It's never too late," the voice said finally. "When heaven speaks, time bends. I saw every silent tear, Daniel. Not one was wasted." The candles flared suddenly, casting long shadows that danced like living things. He covered his face, overwhelmed by light, sound, and something he couldn't name. The hymn faded, replaced by the soft patter of rain resuming outside. The warmth lingered, though the light dimmed. Daniel opened his eyes again and found the church exactly as it had been, still, silent, ordinary. But something had changed. Inside him, the emptiness that had lived there for months wasn't gone, but it no longer felt hollow. It felt full. Not with answers, but with peace. He stayed kneeling for a long time, the last candle flickering beside him, its flame steady despite the wind. When he finally stood up, he noticed something carved faintly into the wood of the pew in front of him, something he had never seen before. It read, "You are seen." His breath trembled. He reached out and touched the carving with trembling fingers, tracing the letters. "She used to say that," he whispered. "Claire always said that." He looked up toward the altar again, and though the light was dim, he could have sworn he saw the faint outline of her smile. Peaceful, distant, radiant. The bell struck again. Midnight. The storm outside broke completely, leaving behind only the smell of rain and renewal. Daniel walked out of the church without looking back, because for the first time in months, he didn't need proof that heaven had spoken. He had heard it himself.
The next morning, sunlight spilled through the cracks of Daniel's curtains for the first time in weeks. It felt softer than usual, like a gentle hand brushing against his face. He sat up slowly, the events of last night tumbling through his mind like a dream he wasn't sure he should believe. The voice, the light, the hymn, the carved words on the pew, "You are seen." Part of him wanted to dismiss it as grief, imagination, or exhaustion, but another part, deep, quiet, certain, refused to let go. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him had shifted, like a door that had been locked for too long was finally open. As he sipped the bitter morning tea that had become his ritual of loneliness, he noticed something odd. The framed photo of Claire that had always tilted slightly to the left now stood perfectly straight. He reached to adjust it, but the moment he touched the frame, he froze. There, resting against the photo glass, was a small pressed flower. White, delicate, and impossibly familiar. It was a lily, her favorite. He hadn't seen one since her funeral, and there was no way it could have just appeared overnight. He picked it up, holding it between trembling fingers. For the first time in months, he smiled. A real smile. Small and trembling, but alive. "All right," he whispered to the empty room. "I hear you." He didn't know who he was talking to anymore. God, heaven, Claire, or all three. But the words felt right. Later that day, he walked to the small cafe at the edge of town, a place he and Claire used to go every Sunday after church. The owner, Mrs. Langford, an elderly woman with kind eyes and too many stories, spotted him immediately. "Daniel," she called, surprised. "It's been ages. Come in, dear." He smiled politely, took a seat by the window, and ordered the same coffee Claire used to love, hazelnut with a hint of cinnamon. As he waited, he noticed a young woman at the next table, crying quietly into her hands. No one seemed to notice her, not even the staff. Something inside him stirred, an ache, a calling,
a strange familiarity in her sadness. He wanted to ignore it, to stay in his quiet shell, but the words from last night whispered inside him again, "You are seen." He stood, hesitated for a moment, then walked to her table. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I don't mean to intrude, but are you all right?" The woman looked up startled. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged. "No," she said honestly, voice trembling. "My father passed last week. I came here because this was his favorite spot." Daniel nodded slowly, sitting down without thinking. "I lost someone too, my wife." Her expression softened. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked. He looked out the window, where sunlight played gently on the cobblestones. "No," he said finally, "but it changes. I think it becomes something else. Like the love doesn't leave, it just takes another form." She nodded, tears spilling again, but this time they weren't heavy, they were release. Daniel hesitated before adding, "Last night I thought I heard something, or someone, a voice. It said, 'I saw her tears, and I saw yours.'" Her eyes widened. She pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. "My father used to tell me that exact thing," she whispered. "Whenever I cried, he'd say, 'Heaven sees every tear.'" Daniel felt a chill, the good kind, the kind that felt like confirmation. He smiled faintly. "Maybe heaven wanted you to hear it again." They sat in silence for a while after that, not needing more words. When she finally left, she looked lighter, her steps softer, her shoulders less burdened. Daniel watched her go, then turned his gaze upward, whispering, "So that's what this is about." From that day on, small moments began to unfold, so subtle they might have gone unnoticed, but not to Daniel. Every time he saw someone hurting, every time he paused to listen, the same warmth would fill his chest. Once, while walking home, he found a stray child crying near the park fountain. He comforted him and discovered that the mother was just around the corner, frantic and searching. Another time, he helped a young man who had collapsed outside the grocery store, only to learn later that the man had planned to end his life that night, and Daniel's simple act of kindness had changed his mind. Each moment felt guided, as if unseen hands were weaving threads he couldn't yet see. One night, weeks later, he sat in his small living room, the candle flickering beside him. He opened the old Bible he hadn't touched in months. It fell open to Psalm 56, verse 8. "You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle." He ran his fingers over the words, whispering them aloud, and something inside him broke, not in pain, but in awe. "So you really did see," he said softly. The air shifted then, almost imperceptibly, like the brush of wings against silence. He didn't need to look up to know he wasn't alone. He could feel it, warmth behind him, the faint scent of lilies again. A whisper came, calm and certain. "I never left." His heart ached with love and longing. He whispered, "Claire?" The light flickered, and though no answer came in words, peace filled the room like a tide. He closed his eyes, smiling through tears. "Thank you," he said, not sure if he was speaking to her, to God, or to both. But it didn't matter. He understood now. The Lord had seen his silent tears not to punish him with silence, but to prepare him for purpose. Every ache, every sleepless night, every unanswered prayer had been part of something greater. A story not about loss, but about seeing others through heaven's eyes. When he finally blew out the candle, the smoke rose in a spiral, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He watched it fade, whispering, "I'll listen." Outside, a soft rain began to fall again. Not mournful this time, but cleansing, like heaven washing the world in light.
Months passed, and life began to bloom again around Daniel, though not in the way it once had. The pain of losing Claire never vanished. It simply transformed, softening into something sacred. He had stopped asking why and started asking what now. Every morning he'd walk to St. Michael's Church, not to demand answers, but to sit in silence, to listen, to feel. Sometimes he would light a candle for someone else, a stranger, a name he'd overheard, a face he'd seen in passing. Other times, people came to him, wordlessly drawn to his calm presence. It was as if heaven had marked him as a quiet keeper of the brokenhearted. One afternoon, as the soft rain tapped against the church windows, Father Reynolds, the old priest, approached him. "Daniel," he said, his kind voice tinged with curiosity, "you've been coming here every day for months now. You hardly speak, but people say you help them. They say you know what to say before they even tell you what's wrong." Daniel smiled faintly. "I don't know what to tell you, Father. I just listen. Sometimes I hear things, not like voices in my head," he added quickly, "but like words that aren't mine, words that bring peace." The priest studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Perhaps heaven has chosen a new way to speak through you." That night, Daniel sat alone again in the church after everyone had left. The candles burned low, their flames swaying gently as if breathing. He closed his eyes and whispered, "If this is what you want of me, then use me." For a moment, nothing happened. Then from somewhere deep within that sacred stillness came the familiar warmth he had come to recognize, the quiet hum of divine presence. The whisper followed, tender and strong. "You have become the voice you once sought." Daniel's breath caught. He bowed his head, tears streaming silently, not from sorrow, but from reverence. "How can I serve?" he whispered. "Tell them what you've learned," the voice said, "that I see them, that I saw you, and that no tear is unseen." The candles flared as if exhaling light, and Daniel knew what he had to do. In the weeks that followed, he began writing. At first, it was just a journal, a record of everything that had happened since Claire's passing. But soon, the words began to flow through him like a river that had waited too long to be released. He wrote about loss, faith, silence, and the gentle ways heaven speaks when the world goes quiet. He called it the Book of Silent Tears. It wasn't a sermon or a guide. It was a collection of heartbeats, of moments when light had found him in the dark. He didn't expect anyone to read it, but one evening, Mrs. Langford from the cafe stopped by with tea and saw the pages spread across his table. "Daniel," she said softly, reading a few lines aloud, This could heal people." She insisted on showing it to her pastor friend in London. 2 weeks later, Daniel received a call from a small Christian publishing house that wanted to print it. He hesitated, uncertain. "It's not about me," he told them. "It's about what God showed me." The editor replied, "Exactly, and the world needs that now more than ever." The book was published quietly, without grand marketing or fame, but something about its honesty resonated. Letters began to arrive from strangers across the country, people who had lost loved ones, who had stopped believing, who had felt unseen. They wrote to say that Daniel's words had made them feel like God remembered their names. Every letter was a miracle, a whisper returned from heaven. One night, as he sat by candlelight reading one such letter, he noticed the same carved words from that first night reappearing faintly on the corner of his table. "You are seen." He smiled through tears. "Still watching, huh?" he whispered. Years passed, and Daniel grew older, but the light in him never dimmed. The church often invited him to speak, not as a preacher, but as a storyteller. He would stand before small gatherings and say in his calm, steady voice, "Sometimes God doesn't answer in thunder. Sometimes he answers in silence, in music, in the face of someone who shows up just when you need them. Don't mistake silence for absence. Heaven has heard every tear." People often cried when he said that, not because it was sad, but because it felt like truth. One quiet Sunday morning, years later, the congregation arrived at St. Michael's as usual. The rain had stopped, and the church was filled with soft, golden light. They found Daniel sitting in his usual pew, his Bible open, his eyes closed, and a peaceful smile on his face. The candle beside him had burned all the way down, its wax pooling like liquid glass. In his hands, he held the same pressed white lily from years ago, still perfect, untouched by time. Father Reynolds touched his shoulder gently, and though Daniel's body was still, the peace in his expression told them everything. They all knew heaven had come for him. That evening, as the sun set behind the steeple, a strange, beautiful thing happened. The church bells rang on their own, 3 slow chimes that echoed through the town. The sound was deep, resonant, filled with warmth. People walking by stopped and listened, many of them feeling a sudden wave of calm they couldn't explain. And when they looked toward the church windows, they swore they saw it, just for a moment, a golden light filling the pew where Daniel once sat, and within it, 2 faint figures holding hands. The scent of lilies drifted into the air, and a whisper seemed to brush through every heart that had ever known sorrow. The Lord saw your silent tears. Some say that night marked the end of Daniel's story. Others say it was only the beginning, because those who had heard him speak, those who had read his book, began to listen differently. They began to pray not just for miracles, but for meaning. They began to see beauty even in pain. And somewhere beyond the clouds, in the quiet halls of heaven, Daniel's voice joined the eternal hymn of souls who had learned that silence, too, is divine.